Welcome. Today, we're diving into something that's part science, part art, aesthetic facial assessment. Think of it like this. Every face has its own unique architecture, and we're about to look at the blueprint that experts use to understand it. So, let's just start with the biggest question of all. When you look at a face, what makes you think, wow, that's a beautiful face? What is it that our eyes and our brains are actually picking up on? Well, it goes a lot deeper than you might think. So is it just random? Is it just art? Or is there some kind of secret formula? Well, the truth is, our brains are basically pattern-seeking missiles. We are subconsciously looking for things like symmetry, proportion, and harmony. The very same things that artists and scientists have been obsessed with for thousands of years. Okay, so in this first part, let's try and crack that code. We're going to pull back the curtain and look at the scientific framework that professionals use to map out a face way before a single treatment is even on the table. It all starts with a science called cephalometry. Now, that sounds complicated, but all it really means is measuring the face. It's like an architect taking a survey of a building before they start drawing up plans. It uses very specific landmarks to map out the underlying structure. This is step one. It's absolutely foundational. So before any tools or anything come out, an expert just watches. They see how your face moves when you talk, how it looks when it's just resting. They're just taking in its unique natural proportions. Because really, every single face has its own geometry, its own story. And two of the most basic rules of thumb here are what we call the rule of thirds and the rule of fifths. So imagine this. Vertically, a really balanced face can be split into three equal sections: hairline to brow, brow to nose, and nose to chin. Then, if you look horizontally, the face is typically about 5 of your own eye widths across. It's these classic ratios that create a kind of visual harmony that our brains just instantly recognize as, well, pleasing. Of course, hormones play a massive role in how a face is sculpted. Estrogen, for example, usually gives us features we think of as more feminine, things like higher arched brows or fuller lips. Testosterone, on the other hand, tends to create more masculine features, like a stronger jaw, a heavier chin, and what's called a prominent supraorbital ridge, which is basically that bony part of your forehead right over your eyes. And you can really see those differences right here, side by side. On the left, you see the softer curves, the higher brow. Over on the right, you've got stronger, more angular features, right? A heavier brow bone, a more defined jawline. The whole architectural blueprint is just fundamentally different. Now, experts also use these categories called biotypes to talk about general face shapes. Mesofacial is considered balanced, brachyfacial is a bit shorter and wider, and dolichofacial is longer and more narrow. But, and this is the most important part, these are just textbook terms. Nobody fits perfectly into one box. A truly great practitioner is looking at the individual in front of them, not just some category. Okay, so knowing all that science is one thing, but it's only half the story. The real magic happens when all that technical know-how meets an actual person with their own goals. And that brings us to the art of the consultation. And this right here is the golden rule. You can forget all the measurements and all the ratios for a second. The single most important thing you can do in this process is just listen. What does the patient actually see? What do they want? A great result always starts with empathy. A good consultation has its own blueprint too. Step one is always listening. Then, usually with a mirror, the expert and the patient look at the face together. It's a team effort. Then you document everything with photos. And only after all that do you create a plan. Together. It's a partnership from the very beginning. Oh, and here is a super important part of managing expectations. Being totally transparent. Listen, nobody's face is perfectly symmetrical. A good practitioner will point out any of those little natural asymmetries before they do anything. Why? Because after a treatment, we all tend to stare at our faces in the mirror a lot more, and we might suddenly notice things that were there all along. It's just better to know your own unique facial landscape right from the start. So now we get to the final part, taking that blueprint and actually putting it to use. This is where all that careful assessment and the collaborative consultation finally come together to guide the treatment itself. And this is a perfect example of how anatomy dictates technique. What you're looking at is a plan for treating a V-shaped frontalis muscle. That's the big muscle on your forehead. For this person, it makes V-shaped wrinkles. So the injection points are mapped out precisely to target that pattern while keeping a careful 1 centimeter safety zone above the brow so you don't get any drooping. And here you can see that plan connecting directly to the person. On the left, you've got the map. And on the right, you see those exact points marked on the patient's forehead just before the treatment. That's the blueprint in action. It's pretty cool, right? And here's the result. The forehead is smoother, for sure, but it looks totally natural, not frozen. And that's because the treatment was completely customized to her unique muscle pattern, which was figured out way back in the assessment. This is exactly what happens when the science and the art come together. Let's do another quick one. In this case, the goal was a really subtle lift to the inner part of the eyebrow. So to do that, the clinician went after the depressor muscles. Those are the little muscles between your brows that pull them down and in when you're frowning. And here's what happens. When you relax those muscles that are pulling down, the main forehead muscle, the frontalis, can finally do its job, which is to lift up. And the result is this really gentle, natural lift that just kind of opens up the eyes. It just goes to show you it's really about understanding the dynamics of the muscles, not just chasing lines on the skin. So, if we're going to sum up this whole blueprint, what are the key takeaways? Well, number 1, every face is one of a kind. Number 2, you have to listen to the patient. A really deep assessment isn't optional, it's the whole foundation. And at the end of the day, it's that deep knowledge of anatomy that leads to good technique, and good technique is what gives you great results. Ultimately, this isn't just about changing how someone looks. It's about how they feel. It's about tailoring everything to one individual and respecting their story. So the real question isn't just how do we create beauty? It's about helping someone write the next chapter in their own story. Thanks so much for joining me.